Hi, ladies, and welcome to the module on self-fullness on our path to embodying the energy of the High Priestess. Two of the key traits of the High Priestess is being selfish and prioritizing self-care. Both of these words are tainted, at least in my opinion. I don't really need to explain how negatively we view selfishness, and self-care has been reduced to facials, massages, and bubble baths. So I've come up with the term selffullness to bring these two concepts together, sort of like giving them a fresh slate. This module is several weeks too late. If you look at the schedule that I gave you at the beginning of this path, I've been physically exhausted and emotionally tender, and I've wrestled with a lot of guilt and anxiety for not delivering on time. And then I realized that in honoring myself and where I was at, I was actually living the truth of self-fullness. Self-fullness is about living from the outside in. It's about sleeping after the alarm went off because that's precisely what your body needs. It's about having fish even though you spent the past 10 years as a vegan advocate because your body says it requires some animal protein. It's about checking in with yourself in the moment and honoring what you need in that moment. But does that not make you unreliable? You may ask. Yes, it does. Does it not make you selfish? Yes, it does. Everything that you create, every interaction that you have is imbued with your energy. You leave energetic footprints and fingerprints in all your interactions. Those are the seeds you plant. Just like when a bee flits from flower to flower, it drops pollen along the way, pollinating the flowers that eventually will bear fruit. When you're depleted, when you're resentful, when you're unwell, that is the energy that is carried by the seeds that you plant. The best gift that you can give to all those people you want to serve. There are many triggers and blocks that will come up when you start truly walking this path of self-fullness. Guilt, shame, anxiety, fears of being judged, fears of being abandoned, fears of being rejected. This is why we have reduced self-care to face masks, massages, bubble baths, 3 hours at a spa, because you can squeeze those things in without causing any ripples in your relationships. Nobody's too triggered by you saying that, please give me an hour to relax in the bath. But it's something else entirely when you say to your husband, I'm not going to spend Easter with your family because I feel horrible when I'm around your mother. It's not worth my emotional well-being. So you'll find that when you take the path of self-fullness, you are going to bump up against a lot of the relationships that you have. The path of true self-care is going to bring up stuff, both within you and externally from the people around you who want to appreciate you when you truly start putting yourself first. Self-fullness will require you to be faithless. I like to refer to Oriah Mountain Dreamer's experience with a particular verse, or rather more specifically, a particular word that she used in her poem, The Invitation. If you've never heard of The Invitation, Google it and read it. It's a beautiful poem. It's worth reading. There's actually a whole book. She wrote a book that unpacks the poem as well. But this particular verse says, it doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can risk disappointing another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can be faithless and therefore be trustworthy. The word faithless grated many people so much that as they shared the poem on websites, blogs, via email, they started replacing the word faithless with the more favored faithful. So the last line then read, I want to know if you can be faithful and therefore trustworthy. Some moralists were so offended that they wrote to Oriah in protest. They found the concept of being faithless morally reprehensible. In fact, Oriah had been in a physically abusive marriage, and when she wrote about being faithless, she had to be faithless to her marriage in order to be faithful to herself. I'm sure the context, once she explained it, appeased some of those who were offended by the fact that she was promoting the concept of being faithless. But generally, people are disturbed by those who choose themselves over the herd, not realizing that the trustworthy person is the one who is true first and foremost to themselves. I'm going to read the thing again. It says, "It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can risk disappointing another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. I want to know if you can be faithless and therefore be trustworthy." In order to truly embody the energy of the high priestess, you're going to have to be okay with being faithless. You have to be okay with disappointing another in order to be true to yourself. You have to be okay with being accused of betraying another in order not to betray your own soul. Oriah had to be faithless to her marriage in order to be faithful to herself. What you are called to be faithless about may be different. It may be your chosen career path, your way of life, your tribe, the plans you made with your best friend for Saturday. Are you beginning to see why the energy of the high priestess is so feared and so easy to demonize? Those women that you were warned against, that you were told to stay away from, the ones we were told we must run away from when we were kids because she's a witch, because she eats children. This is the wild woman. This is what makes her wild. She is untamed by society's expectations of her because she lives from the inside out. She's first and foremost faithful to herself, and that's why she comes across as faithless. I was trying to think of a real person, that I can attach to this energy of self-fullness. And I thought about Etha Kitt. If you don't know about Etha Kitt, go on the Google and then about her. She was an amazing woman who made many people very uncomfortable. I'm going to read a couple of her quotes. The first one says, "The price we pay for being ourselves is worth it. I stayed on my own path and not followed the herd. I made a way for myself." Who is the real you? Someone asked me once. The me who happens to be in front of you at the moment. That's the real me. I've also posted a 3-minute interview with her in the group where she's laughing at an interviewer who suggested that relationships are about compromise. Watch it and then check how you feel. So go through these quotes, like really let them sink in and see how they make you feel. How do you feel about being such a person? And just as importantly, how do you feel, or how would you feel if people perceived you as being this kind of person? A selfish person, a faithless person, a person who starts with themselves. Like this one that says, "The me who happens to be in front of you at this moment, that's the real me." How often do you show up and meet the obligations that you made yesterday, last month, last year, but they're not true to you in this moment and they don't serve your needs in this moment? All of these quotes are quite deep, so in a way, like, take them into meditation, consider them. We like it when people are constant and consistent, both of which are masculine traits. The masculine is constant and consistent. The feminine, on the other hand, is changeable and mutable. But because we live in a topsy-turvy world where Lilith has been replaced by Eve. Remember Lilith? That's Adam's first wife. She was made from the soil like Adam. Adam and Lilith were both made from the soil, meaning that they were equals. They were made from the same materials. But after Lilith ditched her union and left the Garden of Eden, God made Adam a new wife, who's Eve. Now, Eve was made from Adam's rib. Eve was the woman that the man wanted, not necessarily the woman he needed, not necessarily the woman the world needed. Eve is not Adam's equal like Lilith was, the woman who challenged him, right? This is, of course, allegorical. I'm making a point here. Eve came out of Adam's rib. So Eve is the woman that Adam wanted, the kind of woman Adam wanted, not necessarily an equal like Lilith, where they bumped into each other, challenged each other, forced each other to grow. So in this topsy-turvy world where Lilith was replaced by Eve, we have come to expect men to be changeable. But we expect women to be constant, consistent, long-suffering. When you think about people being unreliable, more often than not, what pops up into your mind is men, not women. We have taken on that masculine trait as Eve, as the woman that the men said, I want a woman who'll behave the way I want a woman to behave, who's not going to challenge me, who's not going to force me to grow into my full potential, into my divine masculine. Nobody wants to be reliable, so I'm going to make you be the one who worries about being constant, consistent, and suffering and caring about duty. And it's worked. We are terrified as coming across as selfish, so we betray ourselves over and over again in the quest to uphold the masculine traits of being constant and consistent, of being faithful. But here's the question: how can you trust someone who cannot count on themselves? How can someone offer you something that they don't value themselves enough to give to themselves? As Maya Angelou so rightly observed, I don't trust people who don't love themselves and tell me I love you. There's an African saying which is, be careful when a naked person offers you a shirt. I could make the example of the airline safety procedure. You know, when they tell us that in an event of an emergency, you must put the oxygen mask on yourself first. But we get this, at least intellectually, that you often do you push and push and push yourself to the point of metaphorically gasping for oxygen. Actually, sometimes it's not metaphoric. A lot of us have panic attacks. And a panic attack is literally that you have pushed and pushed and pushed. You don't have enough life force. You don't have enough oxygen for yourself, let alone for someone else. We are driven by external needs and wants that we believe are more important than our well-being. And that is the trait of the warrior, not the high priestess. This is how we fantasize about the image on the left, but end up with the image on the right. And I want you to note, this guy is fine because he has grown into his highest potential as the one who must carry that kind of grief and strife. And she, on the other hand, looks miserable because this is not her path, this is not her feminine destiny. A sincere desire to be of service is wonderful. However, there's a distinction between giving of yourself and giving up yourself. If you feel tired, guilty, or resentful while helping others, then you're not truly helping. You're injecting poisonous energies into the relationship, and then in the long run, no one benefits. Imagine that your body is full of parasites, your blood. Say your blood is full of parasites, and someone you care about needs a blood transfusion. If you give them your blood, they too will be infected with parasites. The right thing to do is to first tend to your health, clear your system of those parasites before you have any business donating your blood to anyone. So you let them know that they must get the blood from someone else who's in a healthy position to do so. How much of what you're giving right now is tainted because you're terrified of being deemed as selfish? We are terrified of being labeled as selfish. A big part of choosing yourself is about putting yourself first. When you put yourself first, especially when you're a female in our society that has made self-sacrifice a virtue for women, you will be branded as selfish. And this is where the self-sacrifice sits. It sits with the warrior, not with the feminine. So I want to ask you, what is being selfish really? Often when someone brands you as selfish, what they're really saying is that you're meeting your own needs instead of theirs. You're putting yourself ahead of them. They want to come first, right? They want to come first. Does that not make them selfish too? I put up this picture because this lady wrote a long post about people who were shaming her for being a bad mom for all sorts of reasons. You see, like she's drinking wine. Well, she posed for this picture when she was writing the post, but she's letting this one eat junk, and this one's on a laptop or iPad, which she probably shouldn't. And the point I want to make here is the fact that the word selfish is relational. It only exists in relationship to something, to another person, to the planet, or whatever. When your actions have no effect on someone else, you can't be called selfish. So, selfishness only exists in relation to how your actions and choices affect someone else's ability to have their needs met. Of course, there is a good selfishness and there's also a toxic selfishness. Like everything in life, there's a light and a shadow. A good selfishness is what we're talking about, which is self-fullness. It's understanding that all relationships require an energy exchange and that you do not do anyone any good if the energy you are transferring to them is toxic. Selffullness requires that you prioritize your self-care at all times so that you don't give people a blood transfusion that's laden with parasites, in an energetic sense. Your no might be interpreted as the toxic kind of selfishness, but so be it. Would you rather give your loved one a blood transfusion of bacteria-laden blood or say no and appear selfish? I really want you to think about that, truly reflect on that. How important are other people's opinions of you? How do you feel about being seen as faithless and being seen as selfish? So during these coming weeks that we're working on being selfful, we're going to explore many themes. We're going to explore neediness, which actually came up in the Goddess Academy group for some reason, but I suppose there's no such thing as a coincidence. We're going to explore resentment, your resentment, you resenting other people and other situations, and other people resenting you by putting yourself first. Conditioning, the world has taught us to behave in a particular way, right? And true self-fullness will have you backing that trend. It'll have you moving into being Lilith and out of being Eve. And a lot of people are not going to like that. We're going to explore awareness a lot, what serves you and what depletes you. Your self-worth is another big one, because again, in this topsy-turvy world where we've taken a lot of masculine characteristics, we have defined our self-worth based on our ability to produce. When I do, I'm worth something. When I don't do, I'm not worth anything. And I've spoken openly about how I've struggled with equating my worth with productivity. I'm going to talk about pleasure, which I touched on quite a bit that time when I was doing that self-love fab thing. So you can go back to those blog posts if you like. And we're also going to talk about energy management. I'm not sure, but I think I put energy management as a whole module in itself. But either way, these are all the things that we're going to go through when we deal with selffulness, because it's complex. It's not about bubble baths and facials and putting flowers in your bathwater so you can post it on Instagram. I was going to give you some homework, but I actually think that there's a lot to digest, right, in the implications of what this path means. So I just want you to listen to this a few times, watch that video that I posted in the group, kit, and like just check what comes up, where your fears are, if anything is making you freak out, because self-awareness is always good to know where you're coming from before you try to figure out where you're going. So next week we're going to talk about neediness, resentment, and awareness. I'm going to leave you with this quote once more. I've posted it before. It says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. And the reason it's an act of political warfare, it means, is because you're backing the trend. This is not how women are taught to behave. So you literally, the herd is going left and you're going right. So I will see you in the group.